The HOA tried turning my private meadow into their parking lot until one hidden can exposed everything. Linda kept parking on my lakeside ranch like she owned it, crushing the same patch of shoreline grass over and over. I didn't fight back with anger. I fought back with evidence. And the moment her tire hit that hidden can, everything she'd buried came roaring to the surface. Stick around. This one gets real satisfying. And if you like stories where justice finally catches up, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next fight. The sound came before the sight. An ugly, grinding crunch rolling across the quiet morning like a boot stomping through dry corn husks. I knew that sound better than I knew my own heartbeat. Gravel mixed with torn meadow grass, crushed under the weight of her silver Infiniti SUV. When I stepped onto the porch, coffee still steaming in my hand, I watched Linda Carrington make her grand entrance the way she always did, by driving straight across my shoreline meadow as if it were nothing more than a welcome mat for her convenience. She didn't slow down. She didn't hesitate. The tires carved two perfect scars through the bluegrass I'd spent months nursing back to life. That meadow wasn't just grass to me. It was the first thing I tended after leaving dam work behind. The first place I stood after the accident that almost took my life. The one patch of earth that made me feel like I belonged again. And there she was, flattening it for the 39th time. I walked toward her as the SUV rolled to a stop barely 20 feet from the HOA lodge's side door. The official parking lot, 49 empty spaces, sat untouched behind the building. But Linda liked shortcuts. She liked showing she could bend the world to her will. She stepped out, heels sinking into the grass she'd destroyed, and flashed that HOA president smile that never reached her eyes. "Linda," I said, steady and polite, "I've asked you not to drive across my land." She didn't even turn her head fully, just flicked her hand like shooing off a fly. "HOA business, Cole. Grass grows." Then she walked off, clipboard tucked under her arm like a sheriff's badge. The lake breeze carried her perfume and dust in the same breath. I stood there, feeling the familiar irritation tighten in my throat. Something about the way the morning sun hit the torn blades of grass made the whole thing hurt more than usual. I set my coffee down on the porch railing and walked the length of the fresh tracks, crouching to touch the crushed stems. They were still warm from her tires. I'd left engineering 2 years ago when the dam project east of Cheyenne went sideways. A cable snapped, a platform gave way, and I hit the water so hard the doctors said it rewired the way my nerves worked. After that, the noise, the crowds, the pressure, I couldn't do it anymore. But this land, Timber Creek Lake, the soft roll of meadow grass, the creak of my wooden dock, the morning fog drifting like a second shoreline. It was the one place that didn't demand anything from me. It let me breathe. Maybe that's why this burned deeper than a simple property dispute. She wasn't just killing grass. She was stomping through the only piece I had left. I watched her disappear into the lodge, all confidence and entitlement, like she owned the entire lake. That's how Linda operated. If convenience required crushing someone else's boundaries, so be it. The HOA board barely challenged her. Most folks didn't want trouble. And truth be told, neither did I. But there's a point where irritation becomes something sharper, something that hums beneath the ribs. I stood there, staring at the path she'd carved, the morning sun shining off those shredded blades. A flock of geese lifted off the water, their wings slapping the surface in long, rhythmic beats. Even nature seemed uncomfortable with what she'd done. I whispered it more to myself than to anyone else, barely loud enough to compete with the wind brushing the lake reeds. This is the last time she crosses this line. The breeze shifted. The lodge door slammed shut in the distance. And for the first time in a long while, something in my chest didn't feel like fear or resignation. It felt like resolve, quiet, heavy, and certain as the mountains beyond the lake. Linda had started something she wasn't prepared to finish. and I had just decided I wasn't letting her take another inch. 2 mornings after her 39th trespass, the wind came down from the ridge with a dry hiss, rattling the iron latch on my front gate. Timber Creek Lake was glass still, the kind of calm that usually settles my breathing. But that morning, something sat wrong in the air, a tension you feel before a storm breaks. I found the envelope sticking out of my mailbox like a warning flag. Thick, white paper. HOA letterhead printed in gold leaf at the top. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. I tore the seal and unfolded the document right there by the fence, boots in the dew-soaked grass. Notice of temporary community access designation, it read. Then the line that made my jaw clench. Cole Whitford's shoreline meadow is hereby designated as overflow parking for the Timber Creek Lakeside Charity Brunch. I read it twice, then a third time. They had taken the one piece of land I fought to protect, the place that grounded me when the world shook, and declared it temporary community property without a word to me. The signature at the bottom? Linda Carrington, stamped and initialed like she was some kind of frontier land baron. Below her signature was a citation for Emergency Community Access Article 14.3b. I'd lived here 8 years. I knew those bylaws backward and forward. There was no Article 14.3b. That section didn't exist. The paper trembled in my hand, not from fear, something colder. A kind of steady anger that settles low and slow like ice forming beneath running water. Behind me, a pickup pulled up at my fence line. Mara Ellison stepped out, her red flannel shirt catching the early sun. She held her own envelope, her expression tight. "Cole," she said quietly, "you should sit down." I didn't. I just handed her my letter. She scanned it, lips tightening into a thin line. "She's done it to you, too," Mara whispered. Last year, she tried declaring the Hendersons' driveway a temporary service road so catering trucks could unload closer. The HOA board did nothing. Folks here are scared of her. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep the tightening in my chest steady. Any idea why she thinks she can get away with this? Mara looked around as if the trees might be listening. Because she always has. She knows most of us won't fight her. And because... She hesitated. "She's been doing this for years. You're just her next target." Her words hung in the morning air, heavy as lake fog. I looked back at the letter, at my meadow, at the ruts still healing from her last pass. "What happens if I refuse?" I asked. Mara swallowed. "Then she'll fine you for non-cooperation with community welfare. Maybe more." Something shifted inside me then. Not panic, but clarity. I'd spent years solving mechanical disasters at dam sites. Broken cables, failed locks, pressure surges. Real threats with real consequences. You face a problem long enough, you learn to see the system behind it. This wasn't about a parking spot. This wasn't about a charity brunch. This was about power. And Linda was testing how far she could push me before I broke. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it under my arm. "Not this time," I murmured. On the walk back to the house, I heard tires on gravel. 2 women from the HOA social committee drove by in a golf cart, glancing at me like I'd already lost. One whispered to the other, too loud for decency, "He just doesn't support the community." It hit harder than I expected. The idea that she was turning neighbors against me before I even had a chance to speak. Inside, I laid the letter on my old oak table. Sunlight from the window hit the paper, illuminating the fake article number she'd invented. A seam in the armor. A mistake. I sat there, tracing the edge of the page with my thumb. The dam taught me something I never forgot. Every system, bridges, valves, people, has a pressure limit. Push it too far, it cracks, and Linda had just leaned a little too hard on mine. I looked out the window at the shoreline, the grass rippling in the breeze like a quiet, wounded thing. The lake shimmered in the morning light, casting a silver path right up to my porch. "This is my land," I whispered, "not hers." The wind carried the sound across the meadow like a promise. As I stood, the envelope slipped from the table, drifting to the floor. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. I'd memorized every word. By sundown, I'd made a decision. Tomorrow, I would start documenting everything. Every tire track, every lie, every forged article, every misuse of authority. Because Linda hadn't just crossed my shoreline this time. She'd crossed into a place she didn't understand. A place where truth, once gathered and measured, becomes unbreakable. A place where a man with nothing left to lose becomes the most dangerous kind of opponent. And she was about to learn that firsthand. The cliffhanger of the evening came when I heard her SUV again, slow, deliberate, rolling across the meadow for just one quick trip before nightfall. My hands curled around the porch railing. "This isn't over," I murmured, "not even close." The lake wind answered with a low, steady whistle through the pine boards, the kind that sounds like the beginning of a storm. By morning, the sky hung low and gray over Timber Creek Lake, the kind of muted light that makes colors look washed in silver. I woke early, earlier than usual, with a heaviness in my chest that wasn't fear, just a quiet determination settling into place. If Linda wanted a game of boundaries, I'd start by showing her where mine stood. I spent the better part of the morning setting up the boundary posts. 8 marine-grade wooden stakes, dark green to match the pines, hammered into the soft lakeside soil in a perfect measured line. Between them, I strung a length of white marine rope, clean, tight, and elegant, not a barricade, just a clear message. This is private land. Respect it. The ground smelled of wet earth and cedar shavings from the posts. Somewhere out on the lake, a loon gave a long, echoing call. Even the quiet felt tense, as if the wind itself was holding its breath. The posts looked good when I stepped back. Simple, polite, impossible to misunderstand. I snapped photos on my phone, documenting the placement and angles. Old habits from engineering stuck with me. If you want to protect something, you measure twice, record everything, and trust nothing to memory alone. Around noon, as I tightened the last length of rope, Mara walked over from her place next door, a bowl of early berries in her hands. She smiled softly. "Neat work," she said. "Looks like something from a lakeside resort." "It's meant to," I replied. "Nothing aggressive, just a reminder." She looked at the posts, then back at me. "I hope a reminder's enough." I didn't say what I already knew, that reminders don't work on people like Linda. She didn't respond to decency, only convenience. By mid-afternoon, the fog had lifted, leaving the lake shining like brushed metal. I went back inside to sort through my old engineering notebook, thinking about how to track tire ruts and soil compression. That's when I heard it. The distant hum of an engine from the direction of the lodge. I stepped onto the porch, heart tightening. Linda's silver Infinity rolled toward my meadow, sun flashing off the hood. She wasn't speeding. She didn't have to. Her slow confidence was worse. She approached the rope line without hesitation, without tapping the brakes, without acknowledging it existed. The SUV pushed straight through the marine rope, snapping it with a sickening twang that echoed through the clearing. The first post splintered, the second toppled, and the rope dragged under her tires like shredded ribbon. Grass and soil kicked up behind her, flaring in 2 muddy arcs. Mara stood in her window across the property, hand over her mouth. Linda parked in her usual spot, 18 feet from the lodge's door, and stepped out as if nothing had happened. She didn't even look at the destruction. She smoothed her blazer, adjusted the strap of her leather purse, and walked inside the HOA lodge, heels tapping like a metronome of arrogance. I crossed the meadow slowly, boots sinking into the fresh ruts. The rope lay in pieces, tangled in clumps of torn grass. One post was cracked at the base, leaking sap like a small wound. I bent to pick up the broken stake. My hands didn't shake. But something inside me shifted. A line had been crossed. Not the one I hammered into the ground, the one inside me. The part of me that believed reason might still work, that maybe she didn't understand the damage she caused, but she understood. And she didn't care. I returned to the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. I sat at my wooden kitchen table, the knotty pine surface warm under my hands, and opened my laptop. It took 5 minutes to file the incident with timestamps, GPS coordinates, and photos. 10 minutes later, an email arrived with the subject line: HOA violation notice. Dangerous obstructions installed without approval. I stared at the message, jaw tightening. Linda had reported me. Your installation of hazardous boundary structures poses a safety risk to community movement, the notice read. Cease immediately or face fines. Hazardous. Boundary structures. Safety risk. I closed my eyes. The irony tasted bitter. I walked back outside, the wind picking up across Timber Creek Lake, carrying flecks of cool mist. I watched the SUV-shaped wound in my land, the broken rope swaying in the breeze like a defeated flag. I whispered to the empty air. If she's predictable, she's solvable. And for the first time, the thought didn't feel like anger. It felt like a blueprint, a problem waiting for an engineer to solve. Night settled over the lake in a wash of blues and blacks. The dock creaked as the wind nudged it against its moorings. A storm moved somewhere beyond the ridgeline, thunder crawling low across the sky. And I stood at the edge of the meadow, looking at the damage, knowing deep in my bones. This wasn't the storm. It was only the warning. What came next would be the real break in the weather. The storm rolled in overnight, shaking the rafters with low rumbles that made the lake shiver in long, jagged lines. By morning, wet pine needles dotted the porch, and the air smelled of damp wood and iron-rich soil. I stepped outside with a thermos of coffee and found my broken rope and splintered posts lying where I'd left them, soggy, defeated, and somehow angrier than before. Something had to change. Something bigger than rope and wood. Mara knocked on my porch rail just as I finished picking up the last fragment. Her jacket was soaked at the shoulders, her hair pulled back tight against the wind. She held a folder under her arm, thick enough to matter. Cole, she said, breath visible in the cold morning air, I think it's time you talked to my cousin. I raised an eyebrow. Lawyer cousin? She nodded. Property rights. And he's not afraid of HOA boards. I sighed, feeling the fatigue settle behind my eyes. Fine. I'm listening. By noon, Mara's SUV wound up the narrow, wooded road toward the Thornton cabin, a quiet structure made of knotty timber and riverstone. The place looked like it had stood for a century, solid, unshakable. Smoke drifted from the chimney, curling into the gray sky like it knew the path by muscle memory. Inside, we found Eli Thornton hunched over a stack of legal books, reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked maybe early 50s, gray creeping into his beard, wearing a flannel shirt that made him seem more like a rancher than an attorney. Mara introduced us, and he shook my hand with a firm, grounding grip. So, Eli said, settling into a chair by his massive walnut desk, you're the man whose land keeps getting used as a racetrack. I sat down across from him. That's the simple version. Good, he said. Simple versions break first. Tell me everything. I laid it all out. The trespasses, the rope barrier, the forged HOA notice, the fake emergency article, the violation letters. With each page I showed him, photos, printouts, measurements. His frown deepened. Then I handed him the most recent letter, Notice of temporary community access designation. He scanned it once, then again, then a third time, slower. Article 14.3b, he murmured, tapping the page with his index finger. Doesn't exist. I know, I said. Not only does it not exist, Eli continued, but the formatting is wrong. The language is wrong. And this, he pointed at Linda's signature, is dated 3 weeks before the HOA even voted to authorize seasonal events. She predated her own authority. He leaned back, folding his arms. The leather chair creaked softly. This isn't carelessness. This is intentional misrepresentation. I felt my pulse kick in my throat. So what does that mean? It means, Eli said, voice lowering, she's been fabricating authority she doesn't actually have, which makes any fines she issued unenforceable, and any community designations she filed could qualify as fraud, especially if they affect land value. A quiet tension settled over the room, heavy as the storm clouds piling over the ridge. Mara looked from him to me. Tell him the other part. Eli reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin binder marked with HOA meeting minutes, handwritten and printed. He flipped to a page near the back and slid it toward me. Look at this, he said. Shoreline maintenance claims. I scanned the sheet. Then I froze. Line 11. Timber Creek Shoreline Restoration. 2,800 USD. Parcel number 77B. Whitford. My parcel number. The one my uncle left me. The one I'd never authorized anyone to touch. I never filed a claim, I said quietly. I know, Eli replied. But Linda did, under your number, and she signed it as if the work was done. My vision narrowed, the printed words blurring at the edges. She stole your parcel identity, Eli continued, flipping to more pages. And she's been filing maintenance expenses for shoreline repairs that never occurred. If she's been doing this on multiple parcels, we're not talking about a personal spat anymore. We're talking about financial misconduct. A gust of wind slammed against the cabin, rattling the window panes. It sounded like the lake itself inhaling sharply. Eli rested both hands on the desk. Cole, this isn't about grass or trespassing. She's reallocating property rights piece by piece, manufacturing a paper trail. If she files enough false maintenance claims tied to your shoreline, she could legally justify declaring parts of it communal access. That's how people lose land without ever selling it. Mara whispered, I told you she was dangerous. My mind raced, images of Linda striding across my meadow, waving that clipboard like a scepter. Her voice dripping confidence. Grass grows, Cole. And somewhere behind all that arrogance was a deeper game, a bigger plan. Eli pushed the documents back toward me. We're not going to confront her head on, not yet. First, we gather everything. Witness statements, video, copies of every HOA filing with your parcel number on it. You build the evidence, not the fight. He paused, studying me. Cole, did you know she's been filing shoreline maintenance expenses under your parcel number? The question sat heavy between us. No, I said, voice steady but low. But I do now. Eli nodded slowly. Good. Because knowledge is the first lever, and you're about to move a very large stone. Outside, thunder cracked across the lake, rolling through the valley like a warning shot. But for the first time in days, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. The storm outside wasn't the one I needed to worry about. The real one was inside the HOA, and it had just begun to break. The next morning, Timber Creek Lake lay under a pale sheet of mist, soft as breath on glass. My boots were still damp from the night rainfall as I stepped into the meadow, surveying the damage with a new perspective. Before, I'd seen tire ruts. Now, after talking with Eli, I saw evidence, Patterns, repeats, predictable movements carved into the land like tracks left by machinery. Machines don't lie. People do. I crouched beside a rut near the shoreline, brushing my fingers across the packed soil. The same entry arc, the same angle, the same shallow dip where her right tire landed every single time she cut the corner. The grass bent in the same direction. Even the depth of the impressions matched. Linda wasn't just careless. She was consistent. A predictability that, in the hands of an engineer, becomes a blueprint. I took out my old field notebook. Weather-worn leather, edges scuffed from years of dam inspections, and began sketching. Measurements, vectors, soil density observations. Not as a rancher desperate to save his land, but as the man I used to be, the one who solved problems by breaking them into parts until the truth had nowhere left to hide. Halfway through the sketch, the sound of gravel crunching reached me. I turned to see Deputy Aaron McCade's white county truck rolling up slowly, dirt dusting the wheel wells. He stepped out, adjusting his hat, his face carved into a look of caution. "Morning, Cole," he said. "Heard something happened yesterday." "Depends what version made it to you," I replied, closing my notebook. Aaron rubbed his jaw. "Linda filed a complaint saying you installed dangerous materials meant to obstruct community access. Said she nearly hit a post you put up intentionally." I laughed under my breath. "The posts she ran over without breaking?" Aaron didn't smile. His boots thudded softly in the wet soil as he walked the path Linda had carved. "I'm not here to accuse you," he said quietly. "I'm here because, well, between us, this isn't the first time she's filed something questionable, but she's clever about it." "I know," I said. "I've got documents now." He looked up sharply. "You do?" I nodded. "And a lawyer. She's forged articles, misfiled claims, and tried to shift shoreline authority." Aaron exhaled, long and slow. "Cole, you're stepping into something bigger than a property line argument." "I'm aware." He looked around, as if the wind itself might overhear him. "Be careful. Folks around here, they don't cross Linda unless they're ready for a fight." "I'm not looking for a fight," I said. "Just the truth." Aaron gave a short nod. "Sometimes that's the same thing." When he left, the weight of his warning settled onto my shoulders like a damp coat. But it didn't deter me. If anything, it pushed me deeper into analysis. By afternoon, I had mapped out the last 6 months of tire tracks from memory and photos. Every time she had driven across the meadow. The data lined up like stars in a constellation. She drove the same path, stopped in the same spot, checked her makeup in the same angle of sunlight. A creature of habit. A pattern begging to be exploited. I marked the exact latitude of her stopping point with a surveyor's stake, 6 inches east of the boulder my uncle placed 50 years ago, 18 inches inside my property line. I pressed my boot heel into the ground, testing the firmness. The soil here was softer, a natural dip that amplified pressure. My mind clicked through possibilities. How weight shifts under a rolling tire. How soil density determines impact. How a sudden upward force could freeze movement without doing harm. Physics was a language I never forgot. As the sun dipped into the lake, turning the water copper, I heard footsteps crunching through dry brush. Mara appeared at the edge of the meadow, a small flashlight in hand. "You've been out here all day," she said softly. "Find anything?" I showed her the notebook, pages of diagrams, arcs, soil tests, tire pressure estimates. Her eyes widened. "Cole, this looks like preparation." "It is," I said. "For what?" I looked out across the lake, where the last rays of light shimmered against the surface like sparks on metal. "For solving a people problem," I said. "Using physics." She studied my expression, searching for anger or spite. but all she found was clarity. "Just be careful," she whispered. "She won't stop unless someone forces her to." "I know," I murmured, "and she's about to force herself." We walked back to our houses in silence, the pine needles whispering under our feet as the wind picked up. At my porch, I paused, watching the meadow. The rope was gone, the posts broken, my shoreline marked by tire scars. But where others saw damage, I now saw a map that showed me exactly where Linda would drive next, exactly where her front tire would land, exactly where the truth would reveal itself. I turned toward the darkening sky, the storm clouds drifting away and leaving behind a strange calm. If Linda wanted predictability, I'd give her something far more precise in return, something engineered, something she'd never see coming. And when it arrived, it wouldn't be violence. It would be proof, pure, inarguable, undeniable proof. The kind that ends lies, the kind that ends fraud, the kind that ends reigns of entitlement, the kind that begins with patterns and ends with a reckoning. The next 48 hours moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a man preparing for something irreversible. Timber Creek Lake sat quiet beneath a pale blue sky, the storm having washed the air clean. But beneath that calm, my thoughts churned like spring runoff behind a dam gate. Not chaotic, just building pressure inch by inch. I walked the meadow at dawn, boots sinking into the still damp soil where Linda's tires had carved their usual path. The sunlight glinted off the shallow ruts, highlighting the exact line she'd taken every single time she trespassed. Predictable, mechanical, and because of that, exploitable. Down by the boulder, a granite slab my uncle hauled here decades ago, I knelt and set my palm on the earth, soft, compressible, the perfect place for a small, controlled reaction. Not destruction, not damage, just physics creating clarity. I stood and retrieved the canister I'd set on the porch rail earlier, a heavy-duty expanding foam used for structural insulation. Safe, non-toxic, harmless unless applied in large quantities. But when compressed suddenly under weight, the seal ruptured upward, expanding threefold in seconds. Harmless to metal, difficult to remove, and unmistakable as intentional when paired with documentation. I walked back to the meadow with purpose. Before disturbing a single blade of grass, I lifted my phone and began recording. "Date, time, GPS coordinates," I murmured. "Preparing controlled installation for evidence-only use on repeated trespass route." No anger in my voice, just calm, factual intention. I dug a shallow hole, no more than 4 inches deep, in the precise spot Eli and I had calculated. The grass lifted like a soft blanket, roots still intact. Underneath, the soil smelled dark and rich, carrying hints of rain-soaked minerals. I placed the canister upright in the cavity, neck pointed toward the surface. Then I covered it with the grass patch, brushing the blades until they lay exactly as they had before. No traps, no harm, just a marker, one that would reveal itself only when her tire crushed it. When I finished, I stepped back, wiping my hands on my jeans. From 3 feet away, no one could have spotted the difference, not even a trained inspector. As I stood there, a voice called from across the fence. "Cole, that you diggin' holes out here?" I turned to see Tom Burrell, my neighbor 3 lots down. Broad-shouldered, middle-aged, a Vietnam vet with a quiet spirit and a camera system that could catch a moth sneezing. "What brings you out this way, Tom?" He leaned on the fence post, squinting against the sun. "Saw your rope got busted up the other day. Figured she did it again." He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. "She did," I said. Tom sighed through his nose. "You know, I've got cameras facing the road that get a clear shot of her SUV every time she heads to the lodge. If you need copies for anything, I'd be happy to provide them." I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with sunlight. I appreciate that. Tom nodded toward the meadow. Whatever you're doing, just make sure it's clean. You're in the right here. She's in the wrong. Don't give her anything she can twist. Wouldn't dream of it, I said. He tipped his hat and wandered back toward his porch. I watched him go, then checked my phone's recording one more time before shutting it off. The trap wasn't a trap. It was a forensic device, a truth revealer. It would show, beyond argument, where she drove, when she drove, and that she did so knowingly after repeated warnings. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up across Timber Creek Lake, rustling the tops of the lodge's pine trees. A few attendees of the upcoming HOA Lake Day Festival wandered near the lodge, carrying boxes and folding signs. A banner flapped weakly against its frame. Community Unity Fundraiser. Unity. The word felt rotten. As I crossed my meadow, Mara jogged up the slope to meet me, her breath forming pale wisps in the cooling air. "Cole," she said, "they're already prepping the lot, and I overheard Linda telling 2 volunteers she expects overflow parking on Whitford's land as usual." "As usual," I repeated quietly. "She's counting on you doing nothing," Mara said. "Counting on you backing down. People like her, they only understand consequences." I nodded. "And consequences are coming." We stood side by side, looking out over the lake. The surface glimmered silver under the late-day light, broken only by the ripples of a lone fishing boat drifting near the far shore. The smell of spruce needles floated on the breeze, mixed with distant wood smoke from a cabin chimney. "She'll never see it coming, you know," Mara whispered. "She doesn't have to," I said. "I just need her to follow her pattern." "And she will," Mara replied. "She always does." Night fell slowly across Timber Creek Lake, the sky deepening from gold to indigo to black. The lights at the HOA lodge flicked on in soft rectangles, casting shadows across the meadow. From my porch, I watched volunteers finishing setup for the festival, arranging tables and string lights, laughing without a clue of the storm Linda had stirred. I could see it clearly now, the moment she'd roll across my land again. The moment her tire hit the softened patch, the foam erupting upward, the cameras capturing everything, the truth finally laid bare in front of the community she'd manipulated for years. But as satisfying as the thought was, I felt no malice, no desire for revenge, only a quiet, steady certainty that what I was doing was right. Because for people like Linda, evidence is the only language they understand. As the last of the setup crew left the lodge and the meadow fell silent, I whispered into the cool night air, "Physics always wins." And this time, it would win for the truth. The morning of the Lake Day Festival arrived with a fragile kind of brightness, like the sun was trying too hard. The air was crisp, still cool from the night, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and pine sap drifting down from the ridge. When I stepped outside, the lake glittered with a thin sheet of silver light, broken only by the occasional ripple from a trout rising near the reeds. But beneath all that beauty, tension hummed in the soil like a buried wire. By 9 o'clock, the HOA lodge parking lot was a hive of motion. Vans rolled in with tables, coolers, and audio equipment. Volunteers hammered stakes into the ground, stringing lines of white and blue fabric that fluttered in the morning breeze. Every sound carried across my shoreline. The clank of metal poles, the chatter of neighbors, the thump of speakers being tested. And then came the unmistakable voice, crisp, overly bright, dripping with self-importance. "Make sure the press backdrop is straight. We'll have Channel 8 here at 5 sharp." Linda Carrington. She walked across the lodge steps like she owned the entire valley, clipboard tucked against her hip, hair pulled into a severe twist that caught the sunlight in a polished streak. Her silver Infiniti sat exactly where she always parked it, 30 yards across my land from the designated lot. She had driven right over the meadow again, leaving fresh ruts that sliced across the dew like tire-shaped wounds. A predictable pattern, a signature of arrogance. I stood at the edge of the meadow, arms crossed, watching her from a distance. Not hiding, not confronting, just watching. "Cole." A voice spoke softly behind me. I turned to see Mara, bundled in a light jacket, her arms wrapped around herself as if to steady her nerves. "They say almost 60 people RSVP'd. She's calling it the biggest charitable gathering in Timber Creek history. Which means," I said quietly, "she'll want the grandest entrance possible. And that means your meadow." "Exactly." Mara looked toward the lodge, jaw tightening. "Do you think she suspects anything?" "No," I said, steady, "because she doesn't believe consequences apply to her. People like that don't look at the ground. They don't look at patterns. They don't look at warnings." She nodded slowly. "They only look at themselves." For a moment, we just stood there, the breeze carrying the rustle of festival banners and the sharp tang of lake air. Something about the quiet between us felt like a string being drawn back, tension gathering, building toward a single, inevitable release. Around noon, another vehicle approached, a county sedan with tinted windows. I recognized the plate number from Eli's notes. State Auditor Rachel DuPont stepped out, her dark hair pulled into a smooth bun, a leather portfolio under one arm. She wore a blazer the color of forest charcoal, and a look that suggested she had already read far more than she planned to say aloud. She walked directly to me. "Mr. Whitford," she said, offering her hand. "Ms. DuPont." "I'm here in observance only," she said. "Not officially, not yet." Her eyes drifted to the meadow, studying the tire patterns with a meticulous gaze. "I understand there have been recurring trespasses." I kept my voice calm. 39 as of this morning, and several forged filings tied to my parcel. Her brow tightened. "We'll speak after tonight's event. For now, document everything, every movement, every vehicle, every statement." "I have been," I said. "Good." She turned slightly, scanning the lodge. "Because you're not the first to raise questions about this HOA." The words carried weight, like a door cracking open in a long-sealed room. By late afternoon, the festival was fully assembled. Lanterns hung from the lodge rafters. The barbecue pits crackled with the smell of hickory smoke. The lake shimmered as though holding its breath. Guests began arriving in polished cars that glinted in the falling sunlight, and with every new arrival, attendants directed them toward the designated parking lot. All except one. The person who mattered. At 5:37 p.m., my phone buzzed. A single text. "Erin McCade. She's on her way, and Rachel's in position. Be ready." I slipped my phone back into my pocket and moved to the edge of my porch, eyes fixed on the dusty road winding up from the south. Then, like a silver shark gliding through deep water, Linda's Infinity came into view, sun blazing off its hood, engine humming with smug confidence. She drove slowly, savoring every second of her approach. Guests near the lodge turned, watching her arrival as if she were royalty. And she rewarded their gaze by doing exactly what she had always done. She cut the wheel, entered my meadow, followed the exact same tire path, same angle, same correction, same final arc toward the lodge's side door. Patterns don't lie. Mara stood behind me, barely breathing. Tom watched from his porch, camera already rolling. The meadow hushed as though the lake itself leaned closer. Linda's SUV rolled across the sod. The tire neared the hidden patch. And with every inch forward, the air thickened. The festival chatter dipped. Even the wind paused. 5 more feet. 3. 1. The tire touched the disturbed soil, and physics prepared to speak. But the moment wasn't the explosion yet. This chapter wasn't the eruption. This was the moment before the moment, where fate holds its breath and every tiny tremor feels like the precursor to the breaking point. Linda stepped out of the vehicle, slamming the door, smoothing her blazer with both palms. She didn't look down. She didn't notice anything, because people like her never do until it's too late. Then she turned, scanning the gathered crowd, preparing to make her grand entrance to the gala she considered her masterpiece. Behind her, the grass shifted slightly beneath the tire, softly, almost imperceptibly, the smallest whisper of change before the storm. And the storm was coming, not from the sky, not from the lake, but from the truth about to surface beneath her own weight. "Cole," Mara whispered behind me, "are you ready?" I nodded. Ready as I'll ever be. Because what happened next would make or break everything. The air around Timber Creek Lake felt suspended, as if every particle was waiting for the same instant. The sun had dipped low enough to cast copper streaks across the lodge roof, and the lanterns flickering along the railings painted warm halos on the grass. Music drifted from the speakers, something soft, something meant to charm a crowd. It barely reached me over the thumping in my chest. Linda stood beside her silver Infiniti, greeting guests as if she were the mayor of the valley. She had no idea that fate itself sat beneath her front tire. No idea that her pattern, her arrogance, had finally given the truth the doorway it needed. She lifted her chin, preparing to walk toward the cameras that had begun assembling near the lodge steps. Then, with a sound like a muffled crack, the ground answered back. A sharp pop split the air beneath her front wheel, the kind of sound a hunter might recognize. The moment pressure becomes rupture. Before Linda could turn, a violent plume of bright yellow, expanding foam burst upward, punching through the thin layer of sod like a geyser erupting on command. Gasps shot through the crowd. Someone dropped a plate. Music stuttered and died. The foam expanded fast, too fast for her to process, billowing around the tire, climbing the wheel well, clinging like fast-hardening honey. It grew upward and outward, bubbling, cracking, sealing the metal in an embrace she could neither outrun nor ignore. Linda screamed, "What? What is this? What did you do?" She stumbled backward, heels sinking into the soft earth, nearly twisting an ankle. Her hands flapped helplessly at her blazer, as if the foam might chase her. I walked out from the shadow of my porch, calm as the lake before sunrise. The wind caught my shirt, blowing it gently against my frame. But inside I felt nothing but the unwavering certainty of a man who had spent his life studying cause and effect. Physics always wins. Today, it won loudly. The foam hardened in seconds, locking the wheel so tight it looked welded into the earth. Cameras pivoted toward the spectacle. Channel 8's reporter whispered something excited into her microphone. Guests pointed. Murmurs spread like ripples. What happened? Did she drive on his land again? Is that on his property? Linda spun toward me, face pale beneath her makeup. "You sabotaged my car! This is illegal! I'll have you arrested, do you hear me?" Her voice cracked, not from anger, but fear. I stopped several feet away, binder in hand, and spoke loudly enough for the cameras to hear. "Linda, you drove across my private land 39 times without permission. Each trespass documented, each violation recorded with timestamps, photographs, and GPS data." I held up the binder. "This foam didn't trap you. Your own pattern did." A hush rolled across the meadow. She blinked, confused, as if the world had suddenly turned on her. "That's ridiculous. You can't. You forged an HOA rule that doesn't exist," I continued. "Filed shoreline maintenance claims under my parcel number. Attempted to reassign private property as community access. And..." I stepped closer, voice steady as steel. "You did all of it assuming nobody would look closely enough to stop you." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then another voice rose behind her, calm and authoritative. That's correct. And tonight, we saw enough. State Auditor Rachel DuPont stepped forward, portfolio tucked under her arm, her expression unreadable. I am here in an unofficial observing capacity, she said, turning toward the crowd. But after witnessing this event and reviewing documents already brought to my office, this matter requires immediate escalation. Linda's face drained of color. No, this is a misunderstanding. Rachel didn't flinch. Miss Carrington, we have reason to believe you've been manipulating HOA authority, forging property designations, and misusing shoreline maintenance funds for at least 3 fiscal cycles. Whispers erupted among the guests. Tom lifted his camera for a clear shot. Mara stepped closer to me, breath catching. Deputy Aaron McCade approached from the side, his hand resting casually near his belt. Not threatening, just present. Linda, he said, voice low but unwavering, you're not under arrest, but you're no longer free to leave the property. We need statements from you and the board. Linda trembled, mascara starting to run. You don't understand who I work with, she whispered, eyes darting. You're making a mistake. But the crowd wasn't with her anymore. The tide had turned. The light Linda wrapped herself in for years now illuminated the truth instead. Rachel stepped beside me. Mr. Whitford, thank you for your documentation. It appears to be thorough. I nodded. It's just the beginning. Linda lunged toward the foam-coated tire, pulling at it with both hands, but the hardened mass didn't budge. Her fingertips smeared yellow onto the hood as she cried out in frustration. The cameras captured everything, every crack in her confidence, every unraveling thread in her story, every ounce of proof she'd given us by following her own predictable path. She'd trapped herself, and she knew it. The air felt electric, charged with the collective realization of an entire community waking up at once. The truth had finally found daylight, and nothing would ever look the same again. Ms. Carrington, Rachel said firmly, we need to speak, now. And with that, the real unraveling began. The scene around us remained eerily frozen for several seconds, as if the wind, the lake, and the people themselves were stunned into silence. The lanterns flickered overhead, casting uneasy shadows across the meadow where Linda's SUV sat half swallowed by hardened foam. The bright yellow mass clung to the wheel like a spotlight on guilt. Then whispers spread through the crowd like ripples across still water. What did she do? Is this about the HOA funds? I knew something was off with those extra fees. Linda tried to step backward, but her heel caught in the soft soil. She wobbled, reaching for balance, and Deputy Aaron quickly steadied her, not out of kindness, but protocol. Let's move inside, he said. We'll talk in the lodge office. But Rachel wasn't done with the public part. Not yet. She stepped forward, her voice carrying cleanly across the meadow. Before we do that, she said, I want the community to understand why this conversation is happening. Heads turned. Someone muted the music. Even the lake seemed to hush. Rachel held up a manila folder. Over the past 3 months, my office has received irregularities tied to the Timber Creek Lake HOA, specifically regarding shoreline maintenance funds, tax-deductible expenses, and property use designations. Linda stiffened. This is unnecessary. These people don't need Rachel raised a hand. Ms. Carrington, you've filed multiple expense claims for shoreline restoration under parcel numbers that do not match your own property, including, she opened the folder and tapped a page, Parcel 77B, owned by Mr. Whitford. A murmur rolled through the crowd. I held my ground, breathing slowly. Several of these claims, Rachel continued, were filed for work that did not occur. In some cases, The dates precede the HOA's formal approval of those activities by several weeks. And the signatures, she turned the page toward Linda, do not match verified records. Linda's veneer of control cracked. That isn't my signature. It's been forged. Someone is setting me up. Rachel didn't blink. Every document was submitted under your HOA login credentials. The silence that followed felt sharp enough to cut. Deputy Aaron stepped forward. Ms. Carrington, at this point, I am advising you to cooperate fully. Anything you say is being witnessed. Linda's composure faltered. She pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. You don't understand who I work with, she whispered, voice cracking. You don't understand what they expect. Rachel tilted her head slightly. Then you'd better start explaining. But Linda didn't. Instead, she did what people do when the walls start closing in. She blamed everyone but herself. This is his fault, she snapped, pointing at me with a shaking finger. He's been spying on me, watching me, filing things behind my back. He sabotaged the car to make me look guilty. The crowd recoiled at the accusation. Tom shouted from his porch, We've all seen you tear up his meadow for months, Linda. Mara stepped beside me, her voice steady and cold. You did this. You created your own mess. Rachel held up a second folder. We also have the HOA's internal financial reports, which show discrepancies in disbursements to a company called Carrington Property Services, registered to your cousin in Nevada. Those funds were allocated as community maintenance expenses. Linda's face drained of color. That's a legitimate service provider, she stammered. It has never performed work in the state of Wyoming, Rachel replied. A collective exhale swept through the crowd, both horror and vindication. I studied Linda carefully. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. Not physically, emotionally. Her entitlement had evaporated, leaving behind a woman who suddenly realized the paper fortress she built was soaked through, collapsing in her hands. Deputy Aaron leaned toward her. Linda, I'm going to need you to come with us. She stepped back, shaking her head. No, this isn't happening. I was told everything was legal. The board approved it. I didn't, but she couldn't finish. The lies were wearing thin, and the truth pressed at the seams like water behind a damaged dam. It was only a matter of time before it all burst. Rachel turned to me. Mr. Whitford, your documentation has helped expose something much larger than a property dispute. What we've uncovered tonight will trigger a full audit and legal review. I nodded slowly. I had a feeling the problem was bigger than trespassing. For years, Rachel said, HOA boards across the state have been misusing shoreline funds. Your case may help uncover a much broader pattern. Her words hit me harder than I expected, a mix of relief and fury. Timber Creek Lake wasn't just my sanctuary. It was a piece of communal land, and Linda had twisted its value into currency for her own gain. What happens now? I asked. Rachel closed the folder with a definitive snap. Now, she said, we let the legal process do its job. The investigation begins tonight, and the HOA presidency, she looked directly at Linda, is suspended effective immediately. The crowd erupted, not loud, but with a kind of stunned disbelief. Some gasped, some blinked at each other in quiet shock. A few nodded, as though a weight they'd carried for years had finally shifted. Linda's knees buckled slightly, and Aaron steadied her again, this time with a firmer grip. She whispered, Cole, you don't understand who I work with. Her voice carried real fear this time, fear of consequences, fear of exposure, fear of losing the power she clung to so tightly. I met her gaze, unflinching. No, Linda, I said. You didn't understand who you were dealing with. As Aaron guided her toward the lodge, The foam-covered SUV remained behind. Bright, hardened, undeniable evidence of the truth that had finally surfaced. The lake wind picked up, sweeping across the meadow, rattling the festival banners and tugging at my shirt. It felt like a release, like the valley itself was exhaling after years of suffocation. And beneath the soft rustle of grass and water, one truth settled deep into my bones. This wasn't just justice for me. It was justice for everyone she'd buried under paperwork and fear. And it wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The night after the foam eruption settled into Timber Creek's history like a stone dropped into deep water, waves spreading, echoing, reshaping the shoreline long after the initial splash. The Lake Day Festival had become something else entirely. Not a celebration, but the moment a community woke up. Even the lodge lights seemed dimmer the next morning, as if ashamed of what they'd been used to conceal. Linda's SUV was towed out just after sunrise, two men in reflective jackets sawing carefully through the hardened foam with industrial solvents. They worked in stiff silence, avoiding eye contact with the few early risers who stood at a distance. Every strip of foam peeled back like a layer of truth she could no longer hide behind. By mid-morning, the lake breeze carried the smell of pine bark and fresh earth from where the foam mass had disrupted the sod. It still looked like a wound in the meadow, but not a painful one anymore. More like a scar that marked where something wrong had been exposed. I sipped coffee on the porch, watching the crew's slow progress, when Eli's dusty SUV rumbled up my drive. He stepped out, holding two thick folders and a paper cup that smelled like burnt diner coffee. "Well," he said, climbing the porch steps, "you certainly know how to accelerate an investigation." I gestured to the chair beside me. Linda helped with that. I just followed her patterns. Eli laughed quietly, a sound that cracked through the morning stillness. "You followed them like a bloodhound, and now the state has opened a full audit." He laid the folders on the table between us. Inside were duplicates of every document I'd provided, now joined by additional HOA records obtained overnight. "Rachel's team pulled the HOA's tax filings," he said. "What she suspected? It's worse. The fraudulent charges run across 3 fiscal years, multiple parcel numbers, multiple fake maintenance jobs, and the board claims Linda handled all expenses personally." I exhaled, long and slow. So she wasn't just trespassing. She was laundering her behavior through paperwork. "She was using the HOA as a personal funnel," Eli said. "But the moment she tied your parcel into it, she crossed into criminal territory." As if summoned by her name, State Auditor Rachel DuPont's sedan appeared down the road, crunching over gravel. She stepped out, blazer crisp, hair pulled tight, but her expression softer than the night before. "Mr. Whitford," she greeted, joining us on the porch. "I wanted to give you an update before the community meeting." "Meeting?" I asked. "In 2 hours," she replied. "The board's been temporarily dissolved. The county is overseeing operations until a special election is held. And as for Ms. Carrington," she paused, flipping open her portfolio. "She's facing charges for falsifying documents, misappropriation of funds, insurance fraud, and unauthorized property designation." The words landed quietly, but heavily. Rachel closed the folder. "Your case, the documentation, the recordings, the forensic consistency, allowed us to connect her actions to several statewide irregularities. You may have helped prevent similar schemes in other communities." The lake breeze shifted, brushing cold air against the back of my neck. I looked out toward the meadow, the shoreline grass bending softly. "I didn't set out to expose a statewide problem," I said. "Just wanted to protect my land." "And you did," Rachel said, "but you also protected everyone else's." Eli stood, stretching his arms. "Come on, Cole. Time to face the neighborhood." The lodge was already buzzing when we arrived. Dozens of residents filled the seats, faces weary, hopeful, cautious. When I stepped inside, their eyes followed me. Not suspiciously, not angrily, but with a kind of recognition I hadn't felt in years. Aaron waited at the front beside Rachel, his hat tucked respectfully under one arm. "Folks," he began, "we're here today to clarify the actions taken regarding the HOA and its leadership." Rachel outlined the findings in careful, measured terms. No theatrics, no blame, just facts, evidence, truth. Then she called me forward. I stood behind the microphone, feeling a knot tighten in my throat. Public speaking wasn't something I enjoyed. Not before the accident, not after. But the room was quiet, expectant. "I'm not here to make a speech," I began. "I'm here because for months, someone kept crossing a line, literally and legally. And when I finally looked close enough, I realized that line wasn't just mine. It was everyone's." A few nods. One murmured agreement. "I didn't set traps," I continued. "I set boundaries, and I didn't seek retaliation. I sought proof, because proof is what protects us. Not assumptions, not rumors, not intimidation. Truth." I held up the binder. Every entry in here, every timestamp, every tire track was collected because I wanted a record, not a fight. And that record told the truth we all needed to see. Silence settled in the lodge. A good silence. Then, slowly, applause began. Soft at first, then building. A wave of affirmation stronger than any HOA vote Linda ever orchestrated. Later, after the meeting adjourned and community members offered thanks, the newly appointed county overseer approached me. "Mr. Whitford," he said, sorting papers, "given your role in restoring transparency, the board voted unanimously to offer you a position, Lake Steward for Timber Creek." I blinked. "Lake Steward?" He nodded. "You'll oversee shoreline rights, environmental maintenance, and land use protections. Gives you a say in everything Linda tried to take." A warmth spread through my chest. Unexpected, grounding, right. "I'll take it," I said. By sunset, the meadow was quiet again. The grass glowed gold in the fading light, waving like it remembered when it was respected. The lake shimmered in soft blues and oranges, reflecting the first peaceful evening in months. Mara joined me at the fence line, hands in her jacket pockets. "You did it," she said softly. "We all did," I replied. But when she left and the last of the light drained from the sky, I stayed behind. The breeze stirred the reeds. The dock creaked gently. The water lapped against the rocks with a rhythm older than any HOA rule. I walked to the shoreline, kneeling where the foam had burst from the ground, and pressed my hand to the soil, restored, cleared, honest. "This land just needed someone who wouldn't back down," I whispered. And for the first time since Linda's SUV ever touched my meadow, the lake felt whole again. The truth had surfaced, justice had settled, and Timber Creek Lake remembered who its real steward was. Justice had settled, and Timber Creek Lake remembered who its real steward was. If this story hit close to home, drop a simple "justice" in the comments, so I know you're out there standing your ground too. And if you believe folks should never lose their land or dignity to power-hungry neighbors, hit subscribe and stay with me for the next tale from the lakes, ranches, and backroads we all love.